Well, greetings, future social workers. Welcome back to HIPC 2. Welcome back to lecture 5. You are almost done with your lectures. You are almost completed with this course for the semester. I'm so very excited for all of you. Congratulations. You have persevered, right, in challenging times, challenging moments, not only within your classes, but also outside of class. And for that, I commend you. So I'm looking forward to today's lecture. One of the reasons why I'm looking forward to this is I have some content that I hope you will find inspiring. In addition to that, I'm going to be bringing you more tools and theories that you may use in your work addressing the social problems of our society, right? And so as the focus of our class is macro social work, I'm going to be bringing you a couple more, about 2 more theoretical concepts. And I'm going to be talking about organizations and what it takes to engage an organization. As social workers, we're often doing that, engaging, working with, collaborating with organizations, various types. And I'm going to also provide you with 2 tools: public forums, we're going to talk about, and SWOT analysis, how to do a SWOT analysis, in order to kind of give you direction and sort of a bearing on where you would begin to chip away at the needs of a community and build a plan around that based on the community's input. Okay, so we're going to talk about that today. We're going to hear from a couple guest lecturers. I'm going to tie in some Father Greg Boyle and some Homeboy Industries. I'm going to tie in some spoken word on environmentalism. We're going to be all over the place. I hope that you find it inspiring. And so let's dive into the topic today. All right. As promised, anything that I share with you, I'm going to make relevant, right, for daily life, including our theoretical concepts. So as I stated before today, our lecture is engaging organizations, and it's a continuation of what Dr. Lee Johnson and I said would be your tools for war, right? That you're applying as a social worker when you're going out and changing the world as superheroes, adding more to your tool belt, right? So when you're rocking that MSW cape, you are making profound change in the world, and you know how to do that. And that's the focus for today. Engaging organizations. Let's start off with a couple key terms so we all understand that we're on the same page regarding organizations, okay? So first off, some of you we may have in our head what an organization is, but I'd like to spend just a couple minutes clarifying in social work terminology what we mean by organization. Organization, in a simple, basic kind of understanding, is an organized group of people who have a common goal and who work together. So there are different types of organizations. We often think of organizations sometimes as social workers, aspiring social workers, as being those, government agencies, private nonprofits, charities, things like that. All of those are absolutely accurate. Those are organizations. But organizations also include things like armed forces, right? Secret societies, resistance movements, political organizations, volunteers. And so we're going to dive very briefly into a few examples or definitions, if you will, of what organizations are. It's important to understand that because as a social worker, when you step into a community that, let's say, you are assisting with, right, and meeting the needs of a community, they're experiencing challenges, macro challenges, and you're helping. In this case, it's going to be interesting at times because you're going to meet folks who introduce themselves representing multiple organizations, and you're going to start to ask about these organizations, and you think to yourself, "Oh, I didn't know that type of organization existed." Well, that's because they can be very diverse in nature. A group, right, of people who have a common goal or work together is an organization. I don't know if you're aware of this, but social workers, the majority of social workers provide the majority of America's mental health services, right? So about over 60% of mental health professionals are clinically trained social workers. The reason I share this with you is because some of you may be on the fence about licensure, and you may be saying that licensure may not be for you. That's okay. That's completely normal. I was in the same spot. One thing, if I can share with you some advice and just personal reflection on for me, is licensure was something that I did not choose to pursue early on in my career. Let me give you this advice, right? I was fine. I don't have any regrets about it. I'm still clinically informed. I appreciate and have loved every bit of the work that I have done with a macro emphasis. But I want to share this. In my experience, though, just something to consider is if you're unsure, it may be a good idea to still pursue licensure and work towards that early on in your career. Reason being is because as you progress in your career, as more opportunities and doors open to you, you might find it more challenging to return or to begin to shift gears in your role and apply your clinical work under the guidance of an LCSW. Okay. It just becomes sometimes a little more challenging as life goes on. So if you're on the fence, I would highly recommend considering it. If you're considering it, I would say definitely try to earn that license or work towards that licensure, obtain licensure sooner than later. So just something to think about, right? Now, very quickly, I'm not going to read all of these to you, but organizations are social entities, right? Made up of people with all their strengths and including all of our flaws. Remember, we're human beings, right? Now, organizations are all goal directed. There is a reason, a purpose why an organization exists. And many organizations are structured in a hierarchical system, right, that has departments, depending on the size of the organizations, multiple departments. And these are things like programs, human resources, IT, all of these, recruitment, marketing, billing, right? And have policies, hierarchies, supervision models, and models of delivery. Some of you may be asking, can you give us a template for an organization, what it may look like? That would be difficult for us to do because organizations, and this is the beautiful thing about life, right, don't need to all look the same. Many of them are going to have some or all of these aspects depending on the size of the organization. But if I gave you a template, and you stepped into a startup, private nonprofit 501c3, and then you stepped into the Department of Social Services with Riverside County, two entirely different experiences. So it's difficult to give you the template for exactly what one will look like, but I can guarantee they will have one or multiple, right, of these pieces here. And they're often linked to the to external environment. So like I said, that purpose is usually tied to something, right? A child welfare agency is tied to solving the problem of child abuse, the social problem of child abuse in our country, right? Some address the notion of homelessness, right, in our country. Some organizations are dedicated to providing pro bono representation for individuals without citizenship, right? So there's a focus, right, linked to the external environment of an organization. They don't stand alone in their own bubble, rarely without any sort of, here's what we're trying to contribute, right, to the world around us. Now, some of you may hear like faculty talking about when you go out into the world after you've earned your MSW, go forth, right, and work within a social services agency. And I've heard some students at times say, I don't want to work for a social services agency. I want to work for with aging populations. And I don't want to work for a social services agency. I want to work with individuals without housing. And I would rather not work for a social services agency. I want to work with individuals without citizenship. All right, so this is why I spend time just very briefly on this slide, right? Sometimes in our head, some folks build in that the notion of a social services agency is only like child protective services. Now, while there are a tremendously high number of social workers, including myself in my career, that primarily found their career in the realm of child protective services, that is not only the only example of a social service agency. So I just want to throw that out there, okay? So don't worry. If you want to work with individuals without citizenship, aging populations, right? Individuals without housing, they're providing social services. They're providing services for society as a whole. So you are still working for a social service agency, only there's a different emphasis or focus, right? Primary focus with that agency. I would also throw out one more thing to consider, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Many times in your career as a social worker, you will become very diverse in your skill set very quickly because you'll see the interrelatedness of social problems, right? Working with children and families for 17 years has led me to need to receive training, guidance, right? And seek the expertise of individuals related to homelessness. Working with children and families had led me down the path of being trained in the juvenile justice system and working with gang youth, right? Working with children and families had led me down serving individuals without citizenship. So they're often very connected. So while you may work for a social service agency that has a primary focus, you're probably going to dabble in a little this and that because the needs of our clients are often complex. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that out for us. Now, you may be asking yourself, though, what types of social services agencies are there? And how do I choose one, right? Like, if when I'm done with my MSW program and I want to go out and look for a job, how do I know which one to look for? Um, Let me give you a little bit of advice with this, right? There's primarily three different types of social services agencies. One is public, right? And so I put an example here of the County of Riverside Department of Public Social Services, right? So you go out and you work for the county, or maybe you work for the state as a government employee, right? Working for the County of Riverside. Okay. Another one could be an officially a 501c3, which means a private nonprofit agency. So we're familiar usually with the term private nonprofit. In order for an agency to become a private nonprofit, that agency must register with the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, and become acknowledged, recognized by the IRS as a 501c3 agency. What that means is they're a not-for-profit agency. They are there serving the community as a result of that. Now, let me just throw this out. Some people may think there might be a stereotype that exists out there that if you work for a private nonprofit, you're going to be poor your entire life and in constant debt. And that private nonprofits don't exist to generate revenue, right? A private nonprofit does not legally exist to generate a revenue. Of course, that's not the point, but a private nonprofit is still a business and still needs to stay afloat. And you've seen private nonprofits that have existed in our society for decades, if not even close to centuries, okay? Close to a century. So the reason for that is because you do need to have a mind or heart for entrepreneurship and business if you are going to be a part of a 501c3. A private nonprofit that doesn't manage its money well will find itself closing its doors with the ebb and flow of social problems and funding and all of the changes in legislation and things like that that happen, right, over the existence of an agency. So with that said, I'm going to say this is that I have been very blessed to work for some phenomenal private nonprofit agencies. If any of you want to talk to me outside of this lecture about who those are, I'm happy to share them with you. Some of you may already know. No, you don't starve when you're working with those agencies. At the same time, sure, maybe you're not going to be paid as much as other sectors, but you're going to be okay. On top of that, what I've found for me personally is that the mission-oriented goal combined with the balance of bureaucracy and a little bit of freedom and the primary dedication, right, to those agencies' jobs was a nice balance for me in my career, but it's not for everyone. Let me move on to the next one, and I'll basically kind of point you in a direction of what to consider when you're going for employment when you're done with your MSW program. The third type of social services agency is a proprietary blend. So it's a blend of two, right? It's a blend of the public and the private. And while there's benefits, right, and challenges within this model, still the primary function of a proprietary social services agency is to make money for the agency, okay? That's still the primary focus. Now, here's the thing. Many individuals may say, Dr. Mako, which one should I go for, right? I'm gonna let you know there's no way that I can adequately answer that question for you because you each are different folks, different personalities, and have different needs. Let me put it this way, right? My dad and I came from two very different generations, right? My dad worked in the public sector his entire life, social services, actually as law enforcement, okay? And as an investigator in Department of Corrections and all of these things. He treasured, right, the benefits, the amazing benefits, the pension, the union, and things like this of working with a public entity. There were a lot of benefits to that, which led to security. In my father's mind, security was a primary function: secure income, secure job, secure retirement. Right? When I was coming of age to start working, I personally didn't connect with my employer the same way. Yes, I wanted to have a stable job. I didn't want to worry about if I was going to work the next day or not, or things like that. But at the same time, for me personally, the bureaucratic system of the red tape involved in public agencies was a little heavy for me. Sometimes I felt a little defeated by that, right? And so there wasn't enough freedom for me to be able to do the tasks of my job and still feel fulfilled. that I was serving people and not necessarily the policies that were in place. So for me, I found my haven, my joy, my inspiration working for a private nonprofit sector. So I've worked in public settings, public schools, district attorneys, things like this, and the county, but I've also worked in the private sector and found myself for who I am, enjoying my work primarily in the private sector. Now, with that said, we need amazing, excellent social workers in the public sector. So please don't take this as me discouraging you. A lot of close friends and associates still work in the public sector. My wife works as a public school teacher, right? Still a social services agency, and she's worked in the public sector her entire life. I think that where I've seen this is that my wife and other individuals that work in the public sector in particular have a strength to their personality, their mindset, their approach, where they look at a system, they see that as a challenge and say, how do I work within the constraints because my clients need me, right? They're here in this system and I'm going to stick with it for my entire career. That takes courage. I think it takes persistence. I think it takes a high level of creativity and dedication to your clients. So please don't hear me knocking one or the other. It's like each of these are like jeans. You got to find the one that fits for you, right? You can pick up, two people can pick up the same pair of Levi's and it's not going to fit them the same, right? Okay, so just something to consider. Let me throw a theoretical concept at you, all right? And then what we're going to do is we'll move through this theory, and then I'm going to talk about organizations and what to consider. So there's a theoretical framework called classical organizational theory. Now, classical organizational theory is really a blend of three different types of theories, okay? It represents the merger of scientific management, bureaucratic theory, and administrative theory. These three come together and form like Voltron. I don't know if any of you are too young to realize or remember that reference. If you do, more power to you, okay? But they come together to form classical organizational theory. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to unpack very quickly scientific management, bureaucracy or bureaucratic theory, and administrative theory, so you kind of understand where you're headed when you are working with an organization. I would also like to point out that social workers, and some of you have heard me say this in conversations with you, solid social workers that are like really great at their practice tend to not stay in direct service for very long in their careers. You tend to be called up by management into supervisor roles, director roles, regional director roles, executive directors, CEOs, all of these kind of things. And that's because you have skill sets of leadership combined with solid social work practice. The reason why I'd ask you to pay attention to the next few slides related to classical organizational theories, because I fully predict many of you are going to be leaders in your fields. You are going to start as case managers or social workers, right? Direct service, and you're going to move on to leadership. You are going to be the people leading organizations if you're not already. And for that reason, this is important to know. So classic scientific management theory really was introduced by this gentleman, Frederick Taylor, in the early 20th century. And essentially what you would want to know is there are four principles to scientific management. One, that jobs and tasks should be studied scientifically to develop and standardize work procedures and expectations. So rather than have an organization with a bunch of people coming in every day, right, and saying, I feel like I'm going to do some case management today, right? And social worker B says, I feel like I'm going to do a little therapy today. And another one says, I'm not going to do any case management or therapy. I'm going to do a little billing. I feel like doing some Medi-Cal billing today. No. We want to be able to be deliberate and succinct, organized in our mission of what we do as an agency. The second principle of scientific management theory is that workers should be chosen on a scientific basis to maximize their potential for being trained and turned into productive employees. So let me give you an example of that. I have had the pleasure of hiring, I honestly couldn't tell you how many hundreds of social workers and therapists and parent partners and behavioral coaches, right? And all of this over the course of my career. Sometimes I'm hiring for competency and sometimes I'm hiring for aptitude, depending on the blend of what I've got. Either way, though, what's important to understand is that your skill sets, when you step into an organization as a social worker, are going to be analyzed by your supervisors to determine what do you know and what are you bringing to the organization. What I need to know is it's okay if someone's fresh out of school that I would hire on, but I do know that I do need to train them up, right? Not only into the culture of our organization, but the essential skill sets I need that social worker to perform when they're working with my agency, right? So it's something to consider that is deliberate about scientific management theory. The third is that management and employees should cooperate with each other and work together following standardized procedures. Sounds kind of simple, right? But picture a work environment where the supervisor and the employees are always at each other's throats. A toxic environment where there's undermining, arguing, resentment, right? Defiance going on. That is dangerous within an agency, especially I would say a social services agency, any agency, that culture is toxic, right? But particularly in a social services agency, our primary goal as being social workers and supervisors should be to produce the highest outcomes and effective strategies for our clients. We are there for our clients. Yes, we collect a paycheck, we get benefits and vacation and all of these other things, but we're there because there is a social problem that needs to be addressed. If we are distracted fighting with one another, our focus is not on our clients and we're not giving our clients the best services that they deserve. Okay. So something to consider. And finally, management should make plans and task assignments, which workers should then carry out as instructed. Workers should know as employees, here are the expectations of my role. My role expectations have been clearly defined. My job duties have been clearly defined so that when you are asking me to do something, I know specifically what I need to do so I can go out and do it well, right? Some of you may have had that experience with poor supervisors who didn't give you much direction. And then that supervisor calls you in and says, I was just a little disappointed with your performance today. You really didn't meet the expectation. And you're kind of thinking in the back of your head, I didn't know what the expectation was, right? Well, this is meant to address those concerns within an organization. Now, administrative theory, right, of management was introduced by Henry Fayol in the early 20th century. Now, there are 6 basic functions to this, which is, I'm not going to read all of them and explain them, but you'll see that this is important to understand. This is where, and you can see this in your own experiences of working with organizations, that there's a division of labor. It's clear, right, what tasks are assigned to what employees. Working with the county, you're going to have front end social workers, you're going to have back end social workers, you're going to have eligibility workers, you're going to have supervisors, you're going to have regional directors or deputy directors, right? There's a clear delineation of who works in what job function. Authority and responsibility is definitely present in an organization, especially as social workers. Folks, when you go out, you are working with people's lives. You are not working building a tool, right, or building a product. You are building people's lives. The reality is, if we don't take our work seriously, if we don't take the responsibility of the work seriously, you can find yourselves very quickly in legal hot water. I have been, over just the course of my career, participated in deposition hearings. I have been subpoenaed to court. I have been asked by judges to clarify my service delivery. I have been challenged by families in court. It is important to understand that the hierarchical structure within an organization is essential, not only for your well-being in practice and for your clients, but for your organization to make sure it's still standing, right, decades later. Centralization is a process of decision-making power. We talked last week about board of directors. That's an example of this, okay? Delegation of authority. Now, there's a balance of delegation, right? If someone's so good at delegating that they never do any work themselves, that could be a problem. But any good leader knows they cannot do all the work themselves. You must delegate. If you try to do all the work yourself, it won't be great quality. You will be burnt out and the job won't get done. So a balance of delegation is important. Unity of command is important to understand. Unity of direction. Where are we all headed? Okay, this is the notion of classic administrative theory. And finally, there's this bureaucracy initiated by Max Weber, again in the early 20th century. Now, Max Weber defined bureaucracy as an administrative structure with well-defined offices or functions and hierarchical relationships among the functions, okay? So listen to this. It almost sounds like its own little microcosm, its own little animal, right? The offices or functions have clearly defined duties, rights, and responsibilities. Each office or function is designed without regard for who will hold the office. Relationships within a bureaucracy are impersonal. Decisions are made according to existing rules, procedures, and policies, right? So some of you are listening to this and saying, why would I want to work for a bureaucracy? This sounds so impersonal. It sounds so cold, right? And you just heard me saying that it's absolutely fine to work within a public structure of this, right? I want you to understand one point. Bureaucracy doesn't only exist in the public sector, it completely exists in the private. There's no way to escape it. All right. It's there for a reason. We do need bureaucracy. If you notice here, it says roles are built around the needs of the department, not around an individual. That is good advice. When I'm building new programs for an agency, when we're building the needs of an expanding agency, I'm not there building a job around Antonio Mexico because Antonio Mexico does so great. And here's what I want. I want him to do A, B, and C. I consider what are the needs of our agency? What are the needs of our clients? I design a role for that. And then I see who can best perform that task. So bureaucracy serves a function. It also makes sure that all of these parts of a very large agency or system, things like the Department of Social Services, child welfare, the justice system, right? These are massive systems. The education needs bureaucracy in place in order to make sure it's functioning day to day. But there's a danger to that, right? There's a danger to this notion. So Max Weber also commented on bureaucracy that when fully developed, bureaucracy can also stand in a specific sense under the principle of what we call sine ira ac studio, without sympathy or compassion. Its nature, which is welcomed by capitalism, develops the more perfectly, the more the bureaucracy is dehumanized. And basically what that means is the less personal the job feels, the better the institution does, but the clients or even the employees within it may suffer as a result of that. Okay, things feel like they're missing emotion. We spend too much time in the head, remember what I talked about, and less time in the heart. All right. And so it's important to understand then that a bureaucracy can be detrimental if too much focus is placed on policies and procedures. We start talking more about, well, and I've worked in these agencies before, right? One time I wanted to go for a home visit. I wanted to go visit a kiddo who was going through a rough time. And in order to do that, I had to talk to like 3 supervisors, sign a bunch of paperwork, right? Get approved for this and that, wait a week, and then go out and see a child. That became burdensome for me, right? The need was with the child, not for the paperwork, but there needs to be a balance between the two in our work, okay? Later on, after this notion of classical organizational theory took place, neoclassical theory also started to emerge as well. And this is a basic attempt to improve upon classical organizational theory and argues that employee satisfaction, listen to this, you might like this, as well as economic effectiveness are the goals of organizational structure. Let me say that again. Employee satisfaction is the goal of organizational structure, right? Now, some of you are saying, but why would I matter more than the homeless individual? Why would my happiness matter as much as the individual that's locked in a cage because they're not a citizen? Why would I matter and be important for me to be happy when there's a child being beaten, right, at night, right? Well, it's important to understand when you show up to a job every single day, if you are miserable, you are not going to be the best version that you can be, right, for your client. If you are miserable, if you don't get along the office with your boss, if the toxic environment or the environment in the office is toxic, if you're paid a really low wage, if you have no benefits, how can you feel that your own needs are being met enough in order to focus on other factors such as a client, right? And so notion of salary, benefits, right, in exchange for your work is one thing to consider. But let me throw this out. Research also indicates, and my experience has also followed in this path, that pay is not the only reason why people stay with jobs. People have left jobs that pay a lot of money because they hate what they're doing. Research also shows that people will stay with jobs where they're paid less because they love the work they're doing. there's a little tidbit that I learned from an amazing leader that I had in my career that had always told me, and this actually panned out to be true throughout the course of my career as I saw this: people don't leave bad employers, they leave bad supervisors. So people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad supervisors. Um, Job satisfaction is a major focus to consider. In fact, that's why we have fields like industrial organizational psychology that study the science of work. Right? We're at work, we see our work family more than sometimes our own family. So this is important to understand. Okay. So under neoclassical theory of organization, motivation to participate and motivation to perform are two big things to consider. Let me give you, I want to make sure, um, right here, let me focus on this one here. Changes from this classical view include focus on production results, change from production results to organizational environment, right? Do our employees have what they need to be great social workers? Do they have the training that they need? Do they understand the purpose of the organization? Do they feel like they're contributing to that purpose? These are all important things to understand. This is why, for me, with the amazing agencies that I worked for in my life that were private nonprofits, this is why I stuck with the private sector, because I felt fulfilled in this way. Let me throw out one experience with you. When I was a case manager, I stayed with an employer for 6 years. I lived in Riverside, drove to Santa Ana every single day, as well as Anaheim Hills every single day, waking up at 4 in the morning, coming home sometimes at 9, 10 o'clock at night after doing case management all day, because I absolutely loved my place of work. I loved the people I worked with. I loved the agency. I loved the mission. I loved what we were doing. The pay was okay. It wasn't great. It wasn't bad. It was fine, but I was losing a lot of money because I was driving, right? A lot of gas. I was losing a lot of sleep because I was on the freeway all day. My health dwindled a little bit because I wasn't eating healthy, right? I was popping burgers and fries in the car because I was driving all day, but I stayed with that job because I loved it so much. Right. And so it's important to understand that when you create an environment in an organization where people want to be there and they believe in what they're doing, they're going to stick around. Your turnover is lower and you're prepared to invest, right, in your employees. This also ties to this notion of human relation theories where employees want to feel useful and important, right? So all of this is very basic, right? We want to enjoy the work we're doing. We want to feel like we're contributing and making a difference. I would like to tell you another story, right? If you don't mind. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the story because it's going to tie into all of these theories. It's going to address particularly neoclassical theories of organization as well as human relation theories. The reason why I want to do this is because anytime, again, I throw theoretical frameworks at you, I want to make sure that you understand what this looks like in real life. I want to give you an example of a social problem, right, that exists. And I want to then give you an example of an organization that's working what I believe in a very inspiring way, a transformative way to not only motivate the individuals who are being served, the clients, right, if you will, but also the community. But let's start with the story first, okay? And I'm going to tell you this story. I'm just going to read it to you so that we don't run into the screen sharing problem that we had last time, okay? This is the story of the cracked pot. Now, some of you may have heard this story before, but if you have, it's always helpful to hear again, right? An elderly Chinese woman had two large pots, each hung on the ends of a pole, which she carried across her neck. One of the pots had a crack in it, while the other pot was perfect and always delivered a full portion of water. At the end of long walks from the stream to the house, the cracked pot arrived only half full. For a full 2 years, this went on daily, with the woman bringing home only one half of the pots of water. Right? Of course, the perfect pot was so proud of its accomplishments, but the poor cracked pot was ashamed of its own imperfection and miserable that it could only do half of what it had been made to do. After 2 years of what it perceived to be a bitter failure, it spoke to the woman one day by the stream. I am ashamed of myself because this crack in my side causes water to leak out all the way back to your house. The old woman smiled. Did you notice that there are flowers on your side of the path, but not on the path of the other pot's side? That's because I have always known about your flaw. So I planted flower seeds on your side of the path, and every day while we walk back, you water them. For 2 years, I have been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate the table. Without you being just the way you are, there would not be this beauty to grace this house. Each of us has our own unique flaw, but it's the cracks and flaws we have to make our lives together so very interesting and rewarding. You have just got to take each person for what they are and look for the good in them. So I wanted to share this with you because I just think it's an absolutely beautiful story that relates to social work. And I do believe it also connects really powerfully, right, to the notion of human relations theory as well as neoclassical theory of organization. All of us are flawed. We're human beings. We are serving individuals in our career who are cracked pots, right? They're broken, they're feeling ashamed, and they're saying, what purpose can I have in this life? I've made a lot of mistakes. Maybe I've hurt a lot of people, and I feel awful about myself. What use can I ever have as a result of that? I want to give you now a practical example of a few examples of what a cracked pot can look like in our society, right? That's struggling to find purpose. Want to focus our attention on individuals who are involved with gangs, right? Over the course of my career, I have thoroughly enjoyed working with kiddos who are officially in gangs. They're not just affiliated, but had been in gangs. And many of them were searching for this meaning. What is my purpose in life? Why? What can I possibly do that would create any sort of contribution for anyone else? This is all I have. This is all I'm going to stick with. I want to present to you a 10-minute video called, it's a short video called Exit Wounds that talks about Homeboy Industries and what Homeboy Industries does in Father Greg. Now, many of you are familiar with Father Greg Boyle and his work at Homeboy Industries. I'm going to play this video first. Then what we're going to do is hear another 10 minutes from Father Greg Boyle talking about his agency and how it's designed to address the social problem of gang participation, of gang membership, right, around the world. So let's go ahead and check out this video. And let's examine the social problem first, and then let's talk about the organization, right, since that's our focus for today, on making a difference with this population.
We start today in South Los Angeles, where there's been a deadly surge in gang violence over the past several weeks. Over the past 2 weeks, at least 8 children have been among those shot in separate incidents.
If you had a 27 separate shootout in any other American city, it probably would have made 60 minutes. But it didn't even make the news here.
It's about controlling commerce. It's about controlling the flow of money in and out of community. And while some people may cast it as race, it's a form of manipulation that gang members use because they want to control an area, even at the expense of the lives of the people who live there.
What do you wish this neighborhood were like?
That there won't be no gangsters, no shooting around here.
Anybody who walks into my office for the first time, a gang member who wants to work here, I always ask this one question. Name one good thing that's come into your life because of your barrio. And I only get one answer. They always say, I can't think of a single good thing that's come into my life. Now, that's not the answer that they think I want to hear. That's the truth. But the other day, somebody gave me another answer. A homie sat there and he said, he thought for a long time and he says, well, my barrio has made me who I am. I said, no, it's kept you from who you are. A lot of times people think kids are joining a gang because they're seeking something, but they're always fleeing something, always. No exceptions. I never met an exception. The outsider view often drives the inside of this, our policy and how we see things. So people stand outside this issue and they go, there's got to be something positive that kids are drawn and attracted to But there is no lure, there is no attraction, there is no draw, there is no pull factor, there's only push factor. Kids are not seeking anything positive. They're fleeing something horrendous when they join a gang. That's why. Oh, well, I arrived at Dolores Mission Parish in the mid 80s, and it was the poorest parish in the city and the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. But it also happened to be, which I didn't know, but it was the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in the whole city was my parish. So we had 8 gangs at war with each other in this tiny little area. So this began really because I was burying kids. So I buried my first in 1988 and my 180th just before this past Christmas. 88 to 98 was just the worst, reaching 1,000 gang-related homicides in 1992 in LA County, which is, it's never been like that before. So we started to do things. We started a school, a jobs program. Then we couldn't find enough felony-friendly employers, so we started a business, and then another business, and here we are. This is our 4th location. 1,100 gangs, 86,000 gang members, so about 15,000 folks walk through our doors a year, and then you name just about anything that might be of help, and we do it.
All right, I'm going to pause it there. And the reason I'm going to pause it there is because I want to show you another video of Father Greg Boyle speaking. Now, some of you had the opportunity to hear Father Greg speak at the lecture series this year, and it was absolutely phenomenal, right? I wanted to show you enough to establish you get a sense of the social problem here. The social problem is not an individual problem, is a macro problem, right? Of what Father Greg said, there is no push-pull effect in relation to gang participation. Children aren't seeking to join gangs for the benefit of something. They're running from something horrific. And policy is looking at from the outside and trying to understand this and say, what do we do about it? Father Greg says we're going to do something about it immediately, right? We're trying to employ felons, right, as a result of gang activity, and we didn't find enough employers. There's a quote that Father Greg is known for where he says, I don't employ homies to bake bread. I bake bread to employ homies. And so the purpose of this is Father Greg has this mindset, right? First, of this deep sense of compassion and commitment and honoring, seeing the good in the cracked pot, looking at no matter what challenges, behaviors, mistakes have been made by the homies who come through the door, recognizing that there is value, worth, and dignity to them first off. The second piece to this is saying we are working within a macro structure of a system that is not set up to meet the needs of individuals who have felonies on their record. So what do? I create jobs, right, for this. So I don't want to just bake bread. I am doing this in order to create jobs, meaningful work for individuals. Folks, that is an organization. That's the heart of it, right? This is what we've been discussing from a theoretical framework coming to life. Imagine working with Homeboy Industries, working for a purpose, right? Where you get to know your clients, see your clients, and create change on a daily basis, right? What a powerful, amazing thing to be. I was blessed, like through the work that we're doing, where over a period of time, my parents used to volunteer at Homeboy Industries. My mom used to do a little of the tattoo removal. My dad and Father Greg, Father G, as they call him, became very close in the sense that Father G really helped my dad in a relationship with an individual who was incarcerated in our own family and work through that relationship. And as a result, we've been very fortunate to be inspired through the relationship of Father Greg. And so I want to share with you then some words from Father Greg regarding what he does. Now, the reason I want to do this is because we've already clearly established the social problem. We see the problem of violence, right? Of the use of children in executing violence in communities, right? The hate and the harm that goes forward. What we need to see then is the passion of a leader who's dedicated, right, to not only changing the individual lives of society, but literally organizing, right, the largest gang rehabilitation clinic in the world, right? And so I'd like you to take just 10 minutes. We're going to listen to 10 minutes and 45 seconds of Father Greg, because I'd like for you to hear the mentality of an organization. Father Greg represents Homeboy Industries. He therefore represents the organization. I'd like you to hear the mentality behind this organizational leadership, right? So let's go ahead, pop back on here, and let me jump into the next film, right? All right, here we go.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be with you. I want to apologize. Some of you have probably heard me talk before. It happens. I was speaking at a foster grandparents gathering some years ago, and I had spoken at it the summer before. I don't know why they invited me 2 summers in a row, but after the second talk, a grandmother came up to me. I think she liked the talk. She had big tears in her eyes, and she grabbed both my hands, and she said, "I heard you last year. It never gets better." So, kind of hoping she was misspeaking there. Anyway, thank you for your attention. You know, anybody just wants some attention, especially folks on the margins. I had a homie, a gang member, step into my office the other day, very earnest 16-year-old gang member, standing in front of my desk, and he says, "Look, I need your divided attention." I said, "You are in luck." You know, I suppose there's a vision that brings you to a place like this, a theater for the day, and it's a vision of wanting to see the world looking differently than it currently looks. The prophet Habakkuk writes, "The vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it." But nobody wants to wait for too long. We want to make something happen, and that's what I want to suggest in the brief time I have with you. That what we all want to create and form is a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. I suspect that Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we create and imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? And to that end, what we hope to do, all of us, I think, is to inch our way out to the margins so that we can stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, that we can stand with those whose dignity has been denied, with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. Occasionally, you get very fortunate and blessed to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized, so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable, so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. I suspect that if kinship was our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice, we would in fact be celebrating it. For no kinship, no justice, no kinship, no peace. So for 25 years, it's been the privilege of my life to work with gang members, and they've taught me everything of value, really. But especially in the last couple of years, they taught me how to text, and I'm so grateful to them. I find that it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people, and so I'm pretty dexterous at it, LOL and OMG and BTW, you know, and the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, "Oh, hell no." And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. And So there I am with two homies, Manuel and Poncho. They're older vatos who work in at Homeboy Industries. We have 400 employees there. And guys have been to prison and tattooed. They do a variety of things. They're going to help me give a talk in Palm Desert at a high school. And so we meet at 9. We get in the car. 15 minutes on the road, Manuel's in the front seat, and he gets an incoming text. And he chuckles to himself. And I said, what is it? He goes, oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. Well, I had just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazote as the day began. And Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room where they clock in all our workers. It's a tough job. I said, well, what's he say? Oh, gosh, hang on. It's dumb. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, we died laughing, and then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies, rivals. They used to shoot bullets at each other. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How can we achieve a certain kind of compassion that stands in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it? For the measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them, in mutuality. It was a great privilege of my life to know Cesar Chavez as a friend, and I can remember once a reporter had commented to him, wow, these farm workers, they sure love you. And Cesar just shrugged and smiled, and he says, the feeling's mutual. And that's what we want to achieve, is this sense of mutuality, where we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we're separate. No us and them, just us. For there's an idea that's taken root in the world. It's at the root of all that's wrong with it, and the idea would be this, that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives. How do we stand against that idea? Well, Homeboy Industries was born nearly 25 years ago when I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, Dolores Mission, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. At the time, they comprised the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs there, half of those gangs at war with the other half. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988. And I buried my 180th some months ago. We did a lot of things. We started a school and then a jobs program, and when we couldn't find enough jobs, we started our first business, Homeboy Bakery, in 1992. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. And not everything worked. I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing was not a huge success. Who knew people didn't want gang members in their homes? I did not see that coming. And now we didn't intend to do this, but we have backed our way into becoming the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry center in the country. So 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors. Keep in mind there are 1,100 gangs in LA County and 86,000 gang members. And so you name anything that might be helpful, we do it, from curricular things like anger management and parenting. Lots and lots of mental health counselors, case managers, job developers, free tattoo removal. No place on the planet removes more tattoos than we do. We have a designated clinic, 3 laser machines, 29 doctors, 800 treatments a month. And it was all started because of a guy named Frank who wandered out of Corcoran State Prison, 2 days out of prison. And he wanders into my office, and he's sitting in front of me, and tattooed on his forehead like a banner, like a billboard, and pardon my French, it says, "Fuck the world." Wow. Yeah. And he said, I'm having a hard time finding a job. And I said, Frank, maybe we could put our heads together on this one, So anyway, I found a doctor who donated some time, and little by little, we chipped away at his forehead. And we have our chips and salsas and all the Ralphs and Food for Less, and we have Homeboy Diner, the only place you can get food in the City Hall. We're about to move into the LAX American Airlines terminal. We'll have put a restaurant there. Homeboy Bakery, Homeboy Silkscreen, Homeboy Homegirl Merchandise, where we sell our logo stuff. We're in 24 different farmers markets. We have the solar panel installation training program, and Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. Last year, at the cafe, we had a visit from Diane Keaton, the Oscar-winning actress, movie star, Annie Hall, Godfather movies. And she's there with a regular guy who's there once a week. And her waitress this day is Glinda. And Glinda's a homegirl, been there, done that, tattooed, been to prison, a felon, a parolee. She doesn't know who Diane Keaton is. And so she's taking her order. And Diane Keaton says, "What do you recommend?" And Glinda rattles off the 3 platillos that she particularly likes. And Diane Keaton says, "I'll have that second one. That sounds good." And then something dawns on Glinda at exactly that moment. She says, "Wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere, like maybe we've met." And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it humbly. "Oh, gosh, I don't know. I suppose I have one of those faces, that people think they've seen before." And then Glinda goes, "No, now I know. We were locked up together."
All right, folks, I'm going to pause it there. So, I could listen to Father Greg. I'm sure you could too. Listen to Father Greg all day, right? And part of me wanted to keep the video going, but you can always check it out on YouTube if you like. It's a TED Talk that he had done. I want to point out a couple of things, right, tied to our theories that we were discussing. The shift from classical organizational theory to neoclassical theory, right? And this notion of valuing the employee. If we look at the heart of neoclassical theory, what we would see when we peeled back the layers is this attempt to what Father Greg would describe as to be in kinship with one another, right? To recognize that as an organization, we do need a bureaucracy. Father Greg just talked about the organization, the bureaucracy of the work that was done, right? The bakers and the people making the chips and salsa and the therapists and the tattoo removers, all of that was relevant to theory. There was still bureaucracy that took place, but look at the culture that was created through the vision of Father Greg, the heart, the passion, the humor, right? That was used ultimately so that we can create a large circle, as he described, of compassion so that no one was left on the outside. Imagine the power of working for an organization every single day where that is the goal. Imagine the power, the effect of being the #1 most effective gang rehabilitation center in the world, right? Creating an organization that can make that big of an impact. You can do that too. Right? You can establish your own and lead your own, right? Ultimately, then, how amazing would that be, right? To work for Homeboy Industries, where what Father Greg said was not for the focus of what we can do for those that we're serving, but to get to know one another more through mutuality, is what he had described, kinship, right? This notion. So I wanted to bring those theories to life for you so that you could see the relevance and the importance of what we're talking about. Sometimes when we're looking at theory, right, we forget the fact that theory comes from a place, sometimes depending on the theory and what it is, right? That ultimately what we're trying to do is work with each other a little more effectively, recognize the humanity in one another. And as Mother Teresa said, if we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other, right? Father Greg had said, no kinship, no justice, right? No kinship, no peace. So wanted to leave you with that, right? Organizational culture then becomes essential, right? As an agency, you can go to work every day and feel miserable, or you can go to work busy, overwhelmed at times, right? Managing your time is a task. I don't think Father Greg doesn't have days where he's not tired, right? And challenged by what he does, but he's innovative in what he does. He has a heart and compassion for what he does, and he loves it, right? And so what an amazing thing organizational culture can be. I want to give you another example of what culture can look like in an organization. This is the Ritz-Carlton here, this fancy, super fancy place. Don't you want to walk through there and stay in there when COVID's over? Like get a swanky hotel room there? Wouldn't that be amazing? I stayed at a Ritz-Carlton once. It was pretty cool with a number of folks that were part of a wedding party. We showed up, and in the lobby, this wasn't the one we went to, but we passed through these gorgeous doors, and there were marble floors, like white marble floors all over around it, right? And because it was a wedding party, one of our party members had a bottle of red wine in their hand, accidentally dropped the bottle of red wine on the white marble floor. Okay. Bottle falls, shatters, and we're all sitting there like this, like, oh my God, they're going to kick us out. They're never going to have us here again. That's it, right? Immediately when the bottle falls to the ground, employees start running to the circle like it was some sort of murder scene with towels, and they start mopping and picking it up immediately. And the employee looks at us and says, "I'm so sorry for the trouble. Let me replace that bottle of wine for you all." And we're looking at them like, are you serious? Are you going to kick us out? What is the deal here? Like, we should be apologizing to you. We're so sorry. Oh my gosh, it slipped. And they said, no. Let us give you a credit for the bottle of wine and for some dinner this evening. We are so sorry for the inconvenience. Please consider it handled. And we're thinking, flabbergasted, what happened, right? Now, some of you are saying, what does this have to do with organizational culture, right? I want to tell you exactly what it is. I didn't learn this until a couple of years later in a leadership training that I was in, and when one of my roles later in my career, that what the Ritz-Carlton had done in that moment, well, one, they made a customer for life for me, right? Now, I can't say I can always afford to go to the Ritz-Carlton. Don't get the image in your head, Dr. Mayko just jet sets around and stays at Ritz-Carltons all the time. No, but if I did have the money, I'd be staying at a Ritz-Carlton every single time if I could as a result of this interaction. But there's a reason why. This employee, who I don't even know who this was, but I know they were not a manager, came up and said, "We're sorry for the inconvenience. Let us replace that bottle of wine for you, and let's give you credit for a little bit of dinner tonight on us," right? That cost money. There's an actual strategy that the owner of the Ritz-Carlton uses, all right, in these exact circumstances to create a culture of the Ritz-Carlton and your stay with them. This is I think a 3-minute video. I'd like to share this video with you so you can hear directly, okay, sorry, from Horst Schultz, okay, who is the owner of the Ritz-Carlton, 3-minute video, okay, and he explains this radical creative move of creating organizational culture. Let's hear this.
So one of your very popular policies was to allow every employee, from your busboy to your manager, to spend up to $2,000 to solve a customer's problems. Tell us more about this.
Well, of course, that created a firework when I started that one. I created major fireworks. People were shocked. People were absolutely dumbfounded. But it wasn't a silly decision. It was very clear to me, in my market segment, I want to keep the customer. That is the most important thing that I do. If somebody walks into our hotels, we convince them to want to come back. That's it, even if something negative happens. And particularly then, that's a great chance. So how to do that? But by the way, I of course knew that my average age of my customer was 43 years old. They have 30 more years to travel potentially. I knew what they were spending. I knew they could be worth $200,000. So I was happy to spend $2,000 to keep them. So, and a study showed that the customer, when they had a problem, that 96% of them just want to get rid of their frustration. So when they tell somebody, this is what happened, instead of saying, I called the manager, we taught our employees to say, please forgive me. In fact, I feel so bad that your TV didn't work. I buy you breakfast. Wow. The customers were blown away, very simply. They were I heard so many comments, they were so excited about it, they immediately moved from dissatisfaction to loyalty. And loyalty, we are here to create. So it was a business decision, according to everybody's shock. And at the same time, though, I told every employee in the company, I trust you. You are part of this company. As such, I trust you. We trust you. And that was, so it was a double sword. It was positive and all the way around. Nobody ever gave $2,000.
All right. So I'll end there, right? I wanted to just share this with you. What an amazing thought, right? I didn't even know that I had deliberately been the brunt, right, of a strategy by Horst Schultz. But I will tell you this, that it was absolutely amazing. He was 100% right. It communicated trust and value not only to the customer, but also to the employee. Each employee getting $2,000, now not in their pocket, but having the ability to approve up to $2,000 to fix a problem right away. Now imagine what that feels like as a customer, right? To step in, your TV doesn't work. And rather than, well, let's switch rooms after you've unpacked, or let's figure out like, to get one fixed, let me call a manager. It takes all this time, right? Let's just bring another TV up to your room. We'll fix it right now. I'm so sorry that that happened, right? And then we move on. So you see how organizational culture can impact not only the consumer, the client that you're serving, but also the working environment where employees express satisfaction working with the Ritz-Carlton as a result of feeling trusted, right, by the organization. I trust you and I also value you. I empower you, right? We talked about in our last lecture, empowerment. I empower you to make decisions on behalf of the company that are in the interest of the customer and the company. I believe you are capable of doing that. Again, just an amazing example, right, of organizational culture. I want to shift our mode over to another type of social work, another tool that you're going to be able to use. And for many of you, you came to CBU for the experience not only of social work education, but also of tying it to your Christian roots or your world perspective, right? And so that's great. And did you know that there's actually a spot for you in social work regarding what we call congregational social work? Congregational social work. And congregational social work is basically church social work, professional social work in an organization, faith-based community, oriented with the teachings of Jesus. Okay, congregational social work is professional social work that takes place in a setting of a congregation, within also parachurch organizations, right? So agencies like that have governing boards like Habitat for Humanity, International Justice Mission, Christian schools and universities, World Vision. These are all agencies where social workers are utilized on a daily basis to go about executing the work, the mission of that agency. Now, what's interesting is some people will say, well, that sounds great. I'm really excited about that. But is this an actual thing? Absolutely. Congregational social work is an actual thing. And I'd like you to consider on why we're talking about engaging organizations, because you can also think of the church is an organization as well, right? Social workers are needed within the church. Imagine all the complex challenges, right, that people bring to worship every single week, right? Life still happens, right? It doesn't stop when you enter the church doors, right? You find the strength to continue with that, right, during your worship. So research shows that faith-based organizations provide a narrow range of services than other service providers when compared to non-religious services, or either the equivalent or superior in outcomes. Despite the success, congregational social work is still almost never mentioned in our field of practice. Can I tell you one of the reasons why I love teaching at CBU so much is we get to do both, right? We don't have to cut one part of our identity off or an aspect of the possibility of social work later. Many of you have expressed, you said, you know what, my faith is something important to me, right? I hold that close to my heart. And I also love social work and I want to be an amazing social worker. Look, you can be both here, right? I want to give you an example of congregational social work. I know I'm throwing a lot of films at you, but it's because I'm throwing a lot of theory at you, right? And then what I'm going to do is we'll end with a couple of additional strategies, tools that you can add to your belt. But because like we had talked about here, it's not really mentioned a lot in the field of social work, I want to put congregational social work on a little pedestal here to explain what it is, because it's so empowering. There is a program that exists, a national movement, if you will, within the United States called Safe Families for Children. It's a truly innovative program. It's a grassroots program that started when an executive director that worked in Chicago at an agency that served children and families, basically kind of had his heart broken, right? And if any of you are familiar then with child welfare, in order to access services, many services like things like counseling and anger management and things like this, you have to be in the system first. The challenge to that for those of us who have spent our careers working in child welfare is what we see is things aren't sometimes what the system deems as bad enough for a family to come and ask for services or to get services or help. So this is a real problem that we face, especially in organizational leadership, when you're tied to public funding. Many times I would be sitting at my office, right, doing my work, and I would get a call from a family, right, asking for help. And they would say, is there any way that we can get services through your agency? Is there any way that we could get wraparound? Is there any way that, we can get a behavioral specialist or whatever? And I would have to ask those very difficult questions. Do you have a social worker? Do you have an active case with the county? What county do you live in? And I asked all these questions, and I absolutely hated it, because sometimes at the end of the day, I actually had to try to find resources, right, for a family that was not in the system yet, but is asking for help. A family that says, look, we're on the verge of either homelessness, or we're on the verge of a child abuse report. Something's got to change in our family. Otherwise, things are going to get a lot worse. But because they're not in the system yet, they weren't eligible for any services. The reason I bring this example up of my own work is, one, it's extremely frustrating and heartbreaking, right? But at the same time, this happens all over the country. And so there was a executive director in Chicago who, the story goes for Safe Families, that one day he was leaving his office that day, and on his way out, he was stepping out of his office, and a mother with a baby came to him and said, "I need help with services, right? Like, my baby and I are on the verge of homelessness. I need help, and can I please have services with your agency?" And this executive director, similar to my experience, had been used to having to, not used to, but had become accustomed to the reality that he would have to turn individuals away because they didn't qualify for services. And he said he just couldn't do it this time, that his heart just ached when he saw the mother and the child. And as a result of that, he says, let me help. Like, what do you need? And she says, I need to take care of a few things on my own, but I can't make sure that my baby's safe during this time. And he says, I'll take your baby. I'll take your baby, and you can have access. Where I work, but I'll share, how this works. You'll stay in touch. We'll make sure your baby's fed, clothed, loved, right? And while you are taking care of things, it's outside the system. So when you're ready to get your baby back, you just come to me and we give you your baby back. This literally happened. And the CEO goes home and he's holding a baby, and he shows his wife, and his wife's like, what did you do? And he's like, I couldn't say no another time. My heart couldn't say no. And so she said, we'll figure this out. Now, that couple was a part of a church, congregational social work. And they said, we got this little baby. This happened in our heart, right? This mother is taking care of a few things. She's going to come back, but we just took this baby in. We don't have a crib. And a congregational member said, I have a crib. I can give you a crib. And they said, well, oh, thank you so much. We appreciate that. We just need to figure out like what kind of formula and food this baby eats. And they said, we can get you baby food. Like, we'll take care of that. We'll go bring it to your house. And they said, great. And the guy said, well, I have to go to work. The CEO said the next day. And the mom said, well, I have to go to work. They said, that's fine. We'll come to the house. We'll watch the baby, make sure it's fed and changed while you're out at work. And then they did that. And so the whole church, the whole congregation wrapped around this caregiver and that baby, and provided the means for the mother to then come back into the picture, right? Avoiding entering a case with child welfare, avoiding entering a system, right? Got her needs met and moved on with her life. This was the birth of Safe Families, okay, for children. Now, what I want to do is highlight that Safe Families is part of a national movement that engages churches all over the country. Churches can elect to be a Safe Families church, where families, congregation, serves as caregivers, as cooks, as transportation, as babysitters, as whatever it is that those caregivers need, that baby needs, while that mom goes off, or it could be both parents. In many cases, in my experience, it's been single moms, where they can go in, leave their kid to know that they are safe with highly trained individuals, and then step away, take care of what they need to, come back and get their kiddos without their kiddo entering the system and being placed. All right. This is the notion of innovation, right? This is the notion of a grassroots movement. and of congregational social work. I want to show you one last video, or second to the last video for today, and I promise we'll close out very quickly after this, around congregational social work. This video comes to us produced by a private nonprofit agency that I have a close relationship with called Olive Crest, okay? And Olive Crest has a Safe Families for Children program in Olive Crest. And so I just want to show you this brief video so you can kind of see the story of what Safe Family is and how amazingly inspiring congregational social work can be. Another tool in your belt that you can use to make a difference on a macro level.
It did all kind of.
Okay, so let's go to Safe Families. This is 4 minutes.
Eat the berry.
Bless the food. And these are gifts. Xander, Joseph.
From
Joseph.
to Christ our Lord.
Amen. We tried. I have 4 boys, and they are the goofiest, funniest, smartest. They love playing with each other and also irritating each other. Just like with me, they love me so much, but then they also like making me cry. As a girl growing up, I was always like, I just like things quiet. I don't like to be loud, but they're just like really loud. Their names are Anthony, Alexander, Joseph, and Joshua. My marriage was abusive. It's still hard for me to say that. I was in an abusive marriage. And it's so painful to say that out loud. I don't know why. When I finally let go of the broken marriage and the family that I was holding on to so tight, I fell into a depression. I had a mental breakdown. I had lost my job that I had got, and I was trying to do my best to care for the kids, but I couldn't even care for myself at that time. And so I reached out for help from Safe Families because my kids deserved better than what I could offer at that time.
Safe Families is aimed at being a support for parents who are in need. When families are feeling helpless in any way, they reach out to families like myself who have opened up their doors to welcome in their children and work alongside you and partner with you to make sure that your children have everything they need. I was at church and they were talking about a new ministry they were starting called Safe Families, and I went to the meeting with my husband, and the model of it is so easy. The way you take in the families and the support you have through the church and through the people who work at Safe Families. The church also supported by finding volunteers, anyone to donate clothing or anything that I would need for the boys. I have 3 older children, 2 girls and a boy. My husband, Rob, is so supportive. Whenever I needed support, they were the first ones to say, no, I'll get that, I'll go, I'll take them outside, I'll play with them. They just kind of involve them in their day-to-day routine. When you host children through Safe Families, they feel like they're your own family.
I am just so grateful that my boys have someone else who thinks they're so interesting as well. And that's who they are. They are a group of amazing Christian families who just want to support those parents who need a little bit of a push up, a little bit of a hand up.
God brings people together for different reasons, and Kristen and I were supposed to meet on this life journey, and
Those boys, I think, just opened up our family to realizing that blessings come in different forms. As much as Kristen may feel that I gave to her, I feel she and her boys have blessed us.
Okay, let me reappear on the screen for you. All right, so I hope you found the video useful and inspiring in terms of the power of congregational social work, right? So, it's important to understand you saw this amazing interaction between the host family, which we call the one that took the little kiddos in, right? That was recruited by the church, and the mother, the biological mother, right, who needed to be able to take care of herself in order to take care of her kiddos, right? Going through a life crisis that many of us have experienced, or many of us have known others that have experienced. These are real life crises that happen, right? They happen on a daily basis. And so, the individuals, what we don't see in the background, the individuals who are screening the host families through the church or doing the recruitment of which churches are interested in becoming safe families, social workers. The individuals who are visiting the homes and making sure that the homes are up to par of the host families, social workers. The ones that are training the host families to be prepared to take in kiddos in their home, maybe that they're new to this or are learning the complex needs of what kiddos may come with, right, when they come into the home. Social workers. Amazing, right? And so I wanted to share this with you because it's a powerful example really of the power of macro social work, changing a system. This was a gap in our system that needed to be addressed, right, on a macro level, and it is being filled by innovative practices involving social workers on a macro scale. I wanted you to just kind of appreciate, right, the power of congregational social work and macro social work. So here's the thing. Over the course of your career, what you're doing as a social worker is stepping into families' homes, right, through safe families, right, or passing into churches, going into communities like South Central Los Angeles or East LA, right, and you're trying to determine what is the need of the community. Well, we talk about the need of community and we talk about establishing what are the needs of a community when we talk about needs assessments and setting up needs assessments. And there's our five types of needs assessments that we can do as social workers. These are tools, right? So things like community asset mapping, interviewing, surveys, focus groups, and corroboration. These are all types of needs assessments. Now for the focus of this piece today, I'm going to draw in on two things. We're going to talk about groups, two topics, sorry, and SWOT analysis. Okay, so we're going to talk about those today as tools that you can use in terms of building an asset map or a needs assessment, sorry, for a community that you're stepping into. But first off, let's talk about really what is a community. And a community is a group, right, sharing common location, if you will, experiences or interests, right? So again, very broad how we can define community, right? So things to determine, right, when you're stepping into a community for the first time, whether that's a neighborhood or whether it's an organization or group of people, are things like this, right? Where are the geographical boundaries, understanding the general history, or obviously I'm not going to read all these to you. What are the important issues impacting that particular community, and understanding that just because you've worked with a community, they may have similar demographics, doesn't mean that the needs or important issues are the same, right? Excuse me. Key allies and rivals of a community, depending on what's going on, right, and the demographics, all of this. These are things to consider. So I'm going to talk about public forums for today and SWOT analysis. Those are the two I'm going to focus on with particular reason. Now, all of the other ones are listed in your textbook, so you'll be able to read about these tools. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to cut them out. But for the sake of time and for our time for our lecture today, I just want to highlight two of them, right, so you can draw in an interest on that. The reason being, public forums, we tend to use a lot as social workers. In fact, all of you participated in public forums when Dr. Lee Johnson asked for those public forums to be held for you to give feedback to us about the program, right? So I want to start off by this. Sometimes we're scared or intimidated as social workers to run a public forum. Usually, what I hear from most social workers is because I don't know what we're going to say. People may come in, they start screaming and yelling, and it's going to be all dramatic, and I don't want to be attacked, right, verbally and all this kind of thing. Well, public forums actually have a lot of benefits to them that I want to discuss, and they don't have to be as scary as you think. So that's what I want to draw on today. So, what are public forums? Well, they're well publicized meetings. They're an area where citizens discuss important issues. So sometimes public forums could be held like at a church. They can be held at a city council or a city hall, right? They can have a political focus. They can have a program focus, just like we did in the MSW program. We also know, hey, public forums, they could be held on Zoom now, right? According to the land of COVID. It's a facilitated discussion. So if you notice, let's take the example of the MSW public forum related that was facilitated by Dr. Lee Johnson, right? It was a facilitated discussion around your feedback and experiences of the program. And then what happens is we take a transcript of the discussion used for subsequent planning. So when we have a public forum, the goal of this is to invite the public in to have a discussion about important topics that are important to your consumers, the community that you're working with. And then the plan is, let's do something with it. We don't just have the forum to say, thank you so much for sharing your feedback. And then folks are like, well, what are you going to do with it? And you're like, nothing, but thank you so much for sharing. That is not an effective use of the public forum. And in fact, if that is how you use them, it's almost guaranteed, yes, you're bound to incorporate some conflict into that next one because people are going to come upset, right? Because we didn't do anything with their voice, right? So public forums primarily serve two functions: to give people of diverse backgrounds a chance to express their views, and are a first step towards understanding the community needs and resources. Many times as a social worker, this may be the first time that a community has ever had the opportunity to really step in and say, I have something to say, because no one's given them a platform before. And I have some thoughts about the needs of our community, and I think this is how we can fix it. Okay, so this is an important function of a public forum. Why do you want to bother, right, with a public forum? They're not as scary as you think. First off, you will be doing them at some point as a social worker. I almost guarantee that. I've done public forums that have existed in terms of small groups of foster families giving us feedback on our agency. I've participated in public forums hosted by the state of California when we're talking about policy. I've held public forums with kiddos and parents talking about their experiences with our agency, all those kind of things, right? And they're fine. We do them on a daily basis. In fact, I enjoy doing them because they offer valuable insights into the community. I learn something from folks that come every single time they share in a public forum, and they provide a database for guiding, explaining actions, right? So sometimes I think I may have an idea of how I want to address an issue within the community, but unless I've heard from the community themselves, I could be completely wrong. So they give us direction as social workers, and here's where I place my time and energy and resources, right? They help link your group with people who can help, and they provide feedback, right? So you may roll out this fancy new program, it's all shiny and you're all proud of it, and you're like, look what I have done, right? And you hand it to them, and they're like, and they show up to a public forum, right, that you're leading, and they say, can I give you some feedback? So thank you so much for thinking of us, but I think we actually need this cool thing that you made to do A, B, and C, okay, instead. And you're like, oh, thank you for the feedback. Let me go ahead and make those revisions. This is how we make a difference in the community. Now, it's not as complex as you think to actually run a public forum, right? Things needed to run one, you need a meeting place. In this case, it could be virtual nowadays. Just make sure you got some good Wi-Fi going on, right? Community members, you need to be present. You need easel, newsprint, markers, something to record, right? Even if it is audio recording or even a individual who's quick at typing, a typist, that could help. You need a facilitator and a recorder. You don't want to try to do both. You don't want to try listening and facilitating a meeting and then also trying to type, write, record at the same time, because your attention will be divided. It will appear as if you're not listening. You're not actually able to really listen. And the quality of the overall experience, not only for you as a facilitator, but for the participants in the forum, is not going to be positive. So you want to make sure you have each of those roles laid out. And you have to be willing to listen. This is something that's really important. I've seen great social workers go into public forums and bomb because sometimes the initial reaction to feedback is to be defensive. Feedback is just feedback. It comes in different forms. If you are not in a place where you're prepared to listen to the feedback given, I would recommend not doing the forum at that time, because it can lead to more of an adversarial experience for everyone involved, and we want to avoid that, right? So here is like a list of questions that you can ask in a public forum, right? And you can always revisit these later, but I wanted you to have these tools, right, in your belt for you future superheroes, right? So some questions that you can ask, and you might have seen Dr. Lee Johnson follow a similar format, right, in the public forum, is issues or concerns. What are the problems and consequences? Who is affected by the issue at hand that we're discussing today, and how? How are they related? Concerns, and are they widespread? And then what barriers might we be facing, right? Who might oppose these new efforts of these needs, right, that you want? What are other limitations? How can this be overcome? If you want to get a good idea of what public forums can look like in certain ways, you could even check in with your local city council meetings in your neighborhoods when they're talking about things like what's going on in the neighborhood and what to address. These are great places to get a feel for public forums, okay? You can also ask questions like, what resources do you need, right, to address this issue? Where can they be found? Who can contribute? These are all questions that you can ask. What you really want to do in the bottom two, though, when we talk about alternatives and solutions, this is essential. Even if, right, an alternative or solution is brought to the table and you don't think personally that it's a great idea, I would highly recommend incorporating the feedback and developing a plan, so long as it's not outlandish and it's going to hurt someone else, that utilizes the community's input, because it's their input. If you dismiss their input and go with your idea, and your idea fails, you're the one with sort of egg on your face, making it look like you thought you knew everything better than the community. That's not a good foot to start off on when building community relations. You will be surprised, right? And we shouldn't be, because the reality is the community would know the community's needs the best, but sometimes we think, and this is where our ego steps in, that because we've gone to school or read a book or taken HIPC 2 with Dr. Mako or Dr. Lee Johnson, that we know more than the community, and we want to avoid that, right? So sometimes the community's solution may not be your solution, but it's important to go with that first. If it fails, you can always come up with another idea, one that you bring to the table, right? So when you're organizing this, you want to consider a public forum. You want to consider a few key pieces here, right? You want to consider things like, if you're talking about a public forum, you have to recognize the time, right? How you get there, where it's being held, how it's being advertised. All of these factors are deliberate. You don't just want to kind of post a couple flyers around the neighborhood and say, public forum, come tell me your ideas, right? Because if it's not accessible, if it's not during a time where working families can make it, right? If it doesn't feel hospitable, like families are even welcome there, the community's welcome there, it's not going to go well, right? So a couple of things to give you some ideas, like when I've stepped into communities, they were large Latino-based communities, and I would ask them, where would you recommend the forum be held? And they would say, look, we've got a place. It's got all the speakers and the community, and everyone comes to this place anyway. And I said, fantastic, let's use that place. All right, it may not be where I want to hold it, but it's the community, it's a public forum, so you hold it where they want, right? And then they always say, okay, I say, what time? And they said, well, look, there's a lot of families that are in, they got tutoring on these nights and stuff like that, so we need it held at 6 p.m. All right, perfect, I'm gonna be there at 6 p.m. I said, what kind of, I don't assume, what kind of light refreshments do you want to have? And I literally had one time, and this was so cool, and I'm so glad that I asked this question to our community partners. They said, we really like pan dulce. And I said, I love pan dulce, right? Now, here's a specific question that some Latinos may find themselves asking them, what kind of pan dulce, right? So I'm not just gonna assume that everyone likes what I like. And they said, in this particular community, said, we love conchas. And I said, oh, so you like conchas. Perfect. So I went out that night, bought a ton of conchas and juice and all this kind of stuff, and showed up, and it was a simple gesture, right? It was just a little bit of bread, Latino donuts, basically, with some juice. And that simple gesture put folks in the right mood, right, to be able to sit down and say, thank you for hearing us. We set the tone before the meeting even started. These little tips that you can use when organizing a public forum are essential to making sure that it goes well. Okay. Now, finally, here's what I'm going to do. It's been a long lesson, so I'm going to end with our SWOT analysis. Now, the SWOT analysis, I'm going to give you just an overview of where it is. I want to share one last video with you of spoken word, and then we're going to close out today. And the reason why I'm not going to go extensively into the SWOT analysis is because you are going to receive extensive training on the SWOT analysis, I guarantee, later on in your careers. As you move through with your employers, they're going to give you different forms of the SWOT analysis in order to work within the constructs of that program. So you're going to get this later, but I do want you to understand what it is and how it's going to be used throughout your careers. So SWOT analysis stands for, the SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And what you're doing is you're essentially laying forward a plan on how to proceed on an important issue by establishing these things, by analyzing them. So within an organization, in particular, when you're stepping into an organization, let's say you were the next big CEO stepping into the very giant shoes of Father Greg, right? And you're coming in as the executive director or CEO of Homeboy Industries, and you're trying to learn the lay of the land and what's happening next for Homeboy Industries. Where do we go? You may want to conduct a SWOT analysis to learn where are the strengths and weaknesses of Homeboy Industries and what's the opportunities and threats facing Homeboy Industries in this live time, right? That's important to understand. And so SWOT analysis can be useful when you want to explore possibilities and problems for an organization, right? You want to see where can we go? How can we still be here for the next 20 years of operation? What are the things that are staggering our growth and our diversity moving forward? Making decisions about an initiative, determining where change is possible, where do you head as an organization, and adjusting and refining plans mid-course. So what I want to show you is when you're mapping a SWOT analysis, you're literally spelling out what are the internal strengths and weaknesses and the external opportunities and threats facing that issue or that organization or that community, right, or that group, whatever it is that you're addressing as a social worker. It'll look like this, right? So you can actually list out your strengths through this matrix. Let me see if I have another one here. No, this is the one that I'm using, right? So you'll list your opportunities, but you can also list the strengths, all right? And it's important to understand that when you're talking about weaknesses, sometimes what you're saying is there's opportunities that exist, but if we were to address these weaknesses, then we're prepared to take advantage of those opportunities, right? If we are facing a threat, that could be a good thing because it could force us to pivot and have to adapt as an agency and come out stronger on the other end. But this is why it's important to map them out, okay? So these are examples, right? General areas to consider when talking about strengths and weaknesses, right? If you notice, they're very tangible. They're very specific. You don't want to go too broad or vague on these. You want to be very specific in what are your strengths, right? Maybe your staff are fantastic. Maybe you have a brilliant volunteer coordinator who rallies folks around your mission, right? But maybe your grant funding is dipping a little bit as a weakness, right? Maybe funding agencies due to COVID aren't giving as much, and that's taking a toll on your revenue as an agency. These are things that you want to be very specific in noting, okay? And when you're listing external factors, you're considering things like the national economy, right? COVID-19, that's an external factor. It has changed funding, it has changed health, it has changed the way we meet, it has changed the ability for agencies to do their jobs, right? Where you live in terms of your age, race, the gender, the culture of the surrounding area is going to be an external factor that you need to consider for your agency, right? So these are just things to think about, right? I know they seem kind of straightforward, but you'll receive training on this later. The idea behind it in this slide may be helpful to you. So if you want to pause me at one piece and just examine this a little more closely, you're more than welcome to. But this follows the notion of designing, designating a leader, a recorder, conducting the SWOT analysis. And this is usually done as a group. So in past, when I've done SWOT analysis, I've invited folks to the table when I'm in a leadership position from all levels of the organization to speak into this chart here and to tell me what are the strengths, weaknesses of where you're sitting in the agency and where do we need to head next regarding an issue, right? And so it's very helpful to follow this chart as you're moving forward, okay? So it's been a little bit of a lengthy lecture. And again, I'm so sorry for that, but I'll make sure that our residency, we spend time elaborating on some of this more, but please fear not. You're not going to walk away from the MSW program needing to be an expert in conducting multiple SWOT analysis, but you need to be exposed to this tool, because as you learn it later, agencies are going to train you in this, and they're going to do it specific for the needs of their agency. So I just wanted you to have this information. Finally, I want to close out with one last video. I think it's about 5 minutes long, and then we'll close out our lesson for the day. Now, at this point, we've talked about other social issues impacting our globe, right? Racism, institutional racism, the distribution of wealth and power. You watched a movie that was assigned to you discussing environmental factors impacting our society and how this is a macro issue. I stumbled across this fantastic spoken word addressing the issue of environmentalism as it exists in our country. And I want to share this with you because I think it really talks about the motivation of why we do macro social work and why we need macro social workers addressing the needs of the environment. There's a Native American quote that says, "We do not inherit the land from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." I think it's a powerful reminder that even before the industrialization, right, of the world and European colonization, there was an appreciation from Native culture on the environment and how far have we come, right? And being willing to compromise the environment for our own comfort, technology, and what we believe is progress, right? So I want to end with this spoken word addressing environmentalism and the need to recognize the macro issue that is pollution and global warming and the abuse, right, of our natural resources. And then we will close out for today. Folks, I'm so grateful for your participation in today's lesson. So let me go ahead and let's finish up with this last piece.
Dear future generations, I think I speak for the rest of us when I say, sorry. Sorry we left you with our mess of a planet. Sorry that we were too caught up in our own doings to do something. Sorry we listened to people who made excuses to do nothing. I hope you forgive us. We just didn't realize how special the earth was. Like a marriage gone wrong, we didn't know what we had until it was gone. For example, I'm guessing you probably know it as the Amazon desert, right? Well, believe it or not, it was once called the Amazon rainforest, and there were billions of trees there, all of them gorgeous, and... Oh, you don't know much about trees, do you? Well, let me tell you, trees are amazing. I mean, we literally breathe the air they are creating. They clean up our pollution, our carbon. They store and purify water, give us medicine that cures our diseases, food that feeds us, which is why I'm so sorry to tell you that we burn them down. Cut them down with brutal machines, horrific, at a rate of 40 football fields every minute. That's 50% of all the trees in the world gone in the last 100 years. Why? For this. And that wouldn't make me so sad if it weren't so many pictures of leaves on it. You know, when I was a child, I read how the Native Americans had such consideration for the planet that they felt responsible for how they left the land for the next 7 generations. Which brings me great sorrow, because most of us today don't even care about tomorrow. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we put profit above people, greed above need, the rule of gold above the golden rule. I'm sorry we use nature as a credit card with no spending limit, overdrafting animals to extinction, stealing your chance to ever see their uniqueness or become friends with them. Sorry we poison the ocean so much that you can't even swim in them. But most of all, I'm sorry about our mindset, 'cause we had the nerve to call this destruction progress. Hey, Fox News, if you don't think climate change is a threat, I dare you to interview the thousands of homeless people in Bangladesh. See, while you were in your penthouse nestled, Their homes were literally washed away beneath their feet due to rising sea levels. And Sarah Palin, you said that you love the smell of fossil fuels. Well, I urge you to talk to the kids of Beijing who are forced to wear pollution masks just to go to school. See, you can ignore this, but the thing about truth is, it can be denied, not avoided. So I'm sorry, future generations. I'm sorry that our footprint became a sinkhole and not a garden. I'm sorry that we paid so much attention to ISIS and very little to how fast the ice is melting in the Arctic. I'm sorry we doomed you, and I'm sorry we couldn't find another planet in time to move to. You know what? Cut the beat. I'm not sorry. This future, I do not accept it. Because an error does not become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We can redirect this. How? Let me suggest that if a farmer sees a tree that is unhealthy, they don't look at the branches to diagnose it, they look at the root. So like that farmer, we must look at the root and not to the branches of government, not to the politicians run by corporations. We are the root, we are the foundation, this generation. It is up to us to take care of this planet. It is our only home. We must globally warm our hearts and change the climate of our souls and realize that we are not apart from nature, we are a part of nature. And to betray nature is to betray us. To save nature is to save us. Because whatever you're fighting for, racism or poverty, feminism, gay rights, or any type of equality, it won't matter in the least. Because if we don't all work together to save the environment, we will be equally extinct. Sorry.
Okay. I wanted to share this with you because I just thought it was an amazing example of addressing macro issues in this really inspiring way, right? Talking about this need that change needs to happen, that we're watching all of this happen. And remember what I said is part of empowerment theory is the notion of educating others that they don't have to passively stand by and watch these horrific events take place, that we can be the root, as the video stated, of change in our society. I loved the line that truth can be denied, but not avoided, right? So I just wanted to share like this little red pill, if you will, about environmentalism and the call to action, right, regarding this macro issue. So folks, that's all I have for you today. What we're gonna do is go ahead and close out our lesson. And I just wanna say thank you. Folks, when we come back, we have one lesson left. One lesson, right? And so I want to appreciate all of the time and energy you've placed into this class. And so thank you for that. I want to close out with our centering activity today. Our centering verse comes from Philippians chapter 4, verse 13. I can do all this through him who gives me strength, right? So again, the world doesn't change with one person, but when we can lead others and assemble, right, others to create change around us, we can change the world, right? And if we look to Christ for that strength, we'll have the endurance to continue to persist, right? And for today, our centering word will be accomplishment. So let's allow Christ to come into our heart and speak strength and accomplishment, right, into our hearts today. So let's go ahead and make sure our hands and feet are in a nice, comfortable position. Let's go ahead and push out any of those worries or concerns that we have, any of the anxiety or weight that we're carrying. Let's recognize that we can do all this, right, through him who gives me strength. God has seen you through this program up until this point. He's not going to abandon you, right? For you know the plans that he has for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you hope and a future. So let's go ahead and take that nice deep breath. Close your eyes, and I will keep track of the time. Okay, go ahead and take a nice deep breath and open your eyes. Welcome back. Folks, it has been an absolute pleasure. I want to say thank you. I'm out. I look forward to our last lecture of the semester. Congratulations, really, honestly, on persevering to this point and making it. Folks, the summer is coming. The summer is approaching. You will have a chance to breathe, to take care of yourselves, right? So I highly encourage that you do that. Please be sure to check Blackboard for any of the assignments, due dates that are coming up. Know that if you need anything, that you can go ahead and email me and I will respond. Also know that I am praying for you daily, right? And continue to keep you in my prayers. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you all so much. I will see you back here for our final lecture together. Take care.